If you're going to travel, travel in a way that broadens your perspective. Travel on purpose. And if you are going to travel, travel in a way that minimizes your carbon footprint.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture.
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
For inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up. We are live from Austin, Texas this week. We're going to be sitting down with Rick Steves. Rick's got a new book out titled On the Hippie Trail, Istanbul to Kathmandu, and the Making of a Travel Writer. And then at the conclusion of this pod, Missy and I get to sit down with the Good Faith Media staff as they share some really cool stories. It is a phenomenal pod. You want to stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I am great. How about you?
I am dramatized.
Really?
Yes.
Why are you so dramatized?
So do you remember I don't know, it was a few months ago. Who knows? One day is 400 years in 2025. But do you remember when we talked about how I feel like the word traumatized is overused, and I don't ever want to make anybody who's experienced real trauma feel, but I feel like there's another point of dramatized. Like there's a point at which we experience some little things in our life, and I can say it's dramatic, but I'm dramatized.
Okay,
right?
So tell us why you're dramatized.
I'm dramatized. Everything I fear in life and hate in life has happened today.
Right now.
It's happened
At this
today.
very moment.
And I will say my day started at 4:30 a.m.
Oh, yeah, that's a bad sign.
You remember the light glowing from the cell phone?
I do remember.
No,
that.
you don't, because you were
I
snoring.
was snoring.
Anyways,
I do not remember that at all.
4:30 this morning, I woke up. And let me give some backstory. We're in Austin, Texas this week.
Yep.
With our brilliant staff.
Amazing stuff.
We're on a staff retreat, which is amazing and totally making up for this horribly triggering, dramatized day I've had.
Okay.
So when we realized we were going to be in Austin, Texas this week, when we needed to record, it's kind of, what do we do? What do we do? We've got all these things planned. And the staff is like salivating. They're so excited because they are now our live audience for the first time ever.
Indeed. They are right there before us.
So they are here judging and watching and maybe taking photos of our recording. So that's the first thing. But no, I woke up at 4:30 this morning because the other thing on our docket today was headshots.
Oh, I know you hate headshots.
Hate getting photos taken. So at 4:30 this morning, I awoke panicked because I don't know in the year of our Lord 20 and 25 whether we are wearing side parts or middle parts.
I was talking to Cliff Vaughn about this just earlier today.
I'm anxious to hear what you guys decided.
What did you decide?
Because I am so famously not on trend. So I consulted Google.
Oh, yes.
So at 4:30 this morning.
Versace, Google. Got it.
Right. 2025 side part or middle part.
Yeah.
Here's what I learned.
What'd you get?
We are as divided in our nation about hair parts as we are about politics.
Really?
Yes.
I mean, the partisanship knows no bounds.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fashion experts are all over the place.
Yeah.
So then I had another dilemma. Whatever will I do about my hair parts?
So you prayed about it, obviously.
Oh, Lord careth not. If you can quote me chapter and verse, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah.
But no.
Missy 3-4.
That's right. So what I did was I slipped the photographer the very last homemade cookie that I made and got 2 sessions.
Wow, you're calling out our associate media producer.
Did I get 2 photo sessions? Yes, I did. So I have
he got an extra cookie.
1 set of photos with a middle part, 1 set with a side part. And you didn't even notice, did you?
I did not notice at all. Oh, wow.
But then we had to do video recording, and now we're recording in front of our
live studio audience.
Yes, I am dramatized today. How about you?
I'm doing great.
You love this.
I so love
You
this.
the stage.
I'm trying to decide, do I love performing in front of a live audience more or watching you perform in front of a live audience
You
more?
love it because I can't make you stop and start
That is so
over.
true. This is going to be one take.
I know, which is also my worst nightmare. Like everything I hate in life has happened today. Our staff make up for it.
They do
This has
make up
been a
for it, yeah.
wonderful experience being
Yes.
here. I'm so excited for Good Faith Media and all the things that we've planned
Lots
for
of
the
exciting things.
future.
Yeah.
Yes, I get to work with brilliant and amazing people, and it just I don't know, it gives me chills to think about.
Well, one of the exciting things that we got to do with the staff this week is that we had the pleasure of sitting down with Rick Steves, who is the travel guru here in the United States. And so we talked to Rick about his upcoming book, talked about his journey, and our staff got to share some of their stories that we're going to hear at the conclusion of this
Yes,
podcast.
when I was looking at ways to get out of work this week, I thought we should have the staff help us with our podcast, and we did. And what we have for you at the end is just a real gift, I feel
Yeah.
like, of them sharing stories. So be sure and listen to the full interview and then the outro for some wonderful little nuggets from them about travel. Like you said, we talked to Rick Steves this week. He has a new book out, which is incredible. But through this experience of preparing to interview him, we've been doing reading about him and his take on travel and how travel changes you, how it affects you, how everyone should do this as a means of just a human experience. And so I got to thinking about our travel experiences and wanted maybe you to share an impactful travel experience you had, and then I have something I will bring into the conversation.
Okay. Well, I've been thinking about this a lot after we talked with Rick and then listening to the staff stories. And I've got 3 stories. I'm not going to tell all 3 of them.
Wow,
Thank goodness.
preacher. 3 points.
2 of them were very significant in my life. One was the first time I traveled internationally to Accra, Ghana. Was there with a trip. We have a friendship and a partnership with some Ghanaian Christians over there. And it was really life altering for me. It was one of the first times I had this incredible countercultural experience. And I often tell folks my first time in Ghana, my heart broke, but my soul was healed because of what I experienced there. And it was just a really amazing moment for me to connect with the Ghanaian people, the clergy over there, the churches over there. Just was really remarkable. The second was, and I think I've talked about it on the pod before, and it was a closer trip, and that was within Oklahoma when I went up to Shilako and visited the site of the agricultural school where my great grandmother and her sister were taken at an early age back in 1919. And I walked the entire campus. Very moving. Could talk more about that. I've written about it. Check it out at goodfaithmedia.org. Here's a story I want to tell. I was attending a meeting over in Lviv, Ukraine. And after the meetings were completed, I went outside of the hotel I was staying there in Lviv, and I walked the park. And as I walked the park, I pulled out a cigar. I'm tempted by a cigar every now and again. So I lit my cigar, sat on a bench, and I was sitting there enjoying this beautiful day in Ukraine when a father and son were playing in the park, and they were playing soccer, kicking the ball back and forth. And the ball got away from the little boy, and it rolled near the park bench where I was enjoying my cigar. Well, I kicked the soccer ball back to the little boy. And of course, his face beamed. He got a little mischievous, kicked it back to me, not his dad. And so we had kind of had this, catch a little bit, if you will, between this little boy and myself on the park bench, just laughing and having a good time. And then, after he got bored with me, I walked over to him and gave him a United States quarter. Mm-hmm. And his face lit up. His dad, in Ukrainian, told me how much he appreciated it. That experience transformed me that day. But then years later, I hear about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And my mind immediately went to that little boy. That most likely, as we record this podcast, the little boy is on the front lines. And it just breaks my heart. And these experiences and these encounters that we have while we're on the road are transformative. Mm-hmm. And as Rick will talk about in his journeys across the world, they shape you, they form you. And journey and travel is this opportunity to commute or to connect on a human level like we never could before. And so those three instances, Accra, Ghana, Shalako in northern Oklahoma, and Lviv, Ukraine, those are the three trips I took that changed me forever. What do you have?
Wow, I should have let you finish last. I will say though, you telling that story in that way about the little boy in that you encountered, one, did he forgive you for calling it soccer?
Right. Well, I did that for our American audience.
Okay.
It took everything from me to not call it football.
So who knows if it was his first experience with an American, but it was an experience with an American.
Mm,
And you just don't know what that, did in his
right.
mind to have that experience as a foundation for whatever he's experiencing now. So we could talk more about that,
Mhm.
but I'll tell a couple of stories that I have about travel that impacted me when I was a little girl. I have an aunt who worked in fashion.
Yeah.
We lived in Texas, and she, a single woman living, a corporate life in Boston, and decided at a certain age as a single woman, she thought it would be fun to start having me fly up to Boston in the
Big fun.
summers.
Big
Yeah.
fun.
Oh, shopping,
Oh, yeah.
city.
In the Cape. I got pictures of you at the Cape. Yeah.
So here I am, 9 years old, going to stay in the Back Bay of Boston, very much in the city. Never been any place like that before. Yeah, not like that. And so she would always take a week off and spend it with me, and then she would usually have to work a few days. So where she lived in the Back Bay, I don't know, was maybe a mile or so from the area where she worked at the big fancy department store.
Sure.
And my aunt, not having ever had children,
Yeah.
Didn't know some things. So one day she went to work and she said, "You can sleep in, and just when you're ready to meet up, just walk to my work."
Well, what?
Right. I was 9 years old.
From the Back Bay
From the Back Bay
to where?
to like the downtown Boston area where the fancy department stores were.
So you had to walk from
All
the
the
back
way through the
through
Boston
downtown
Commons,
Boston.
through
the
the park,
Commons?
through the Commons. Yes.
Did you ever wonder what that wacky smell that you encountered in the Commons was?
We're going to talk about smell in a minute. Yes. So I at 9, but I was determined. I was not going to let anybody know. I was terrified
Yeah.
by myself. And I'm not, anyways, like a large. I mean, I was a 9-year-old, but probably the size of a 7-year-old. This
Sure.
little girl walking by herself through the Boston Commons, through the gardens, through the Boston Gardens, through the Commons,
Yeah.
down to the shopping district by myself. I wasn't sure where I was going. I was terrified. I lived in the age, my mother was very much a Reader's Digest, worst case scenario mom. And so kids everywhere were getting kidnapped, satanic panic, all the things.
Yeah.
Somehow I made it, but I just learned a lesson there that people in general are not out to just get you. Nobody paid attention to me. I was a little girl walking. Maybe some wondered why I was walking by myself, but it was really an empowering experience of learning to traverse the world in a not fearful way.
Mm-hmm.
So that was impactful. My mother never knew about that, by the way. In fact, I told that story at her memorial service, and I'm quite certain I heard her like holler from the heavens. But yeah, my second story about travel and how it impacted my life. I have a couple of examples that I'll give, but one, like you, traveling to Africa and landing with a friend who I was with. And when you land in a place, we can watch all the documentaries, we can read the books, we can see the photos.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot experience smell through any of those.
Most powerful memory we have is smell.
Right. So landing, as you mentioned, in Accra, Ghana, that is so distinct. And I remember that changed forever my perception of travel. I realized at that moment, you cannot experience a place without physically being there for the reasons you said, like with the little boy in the park, those interactions. But being there with all 5 of your senses makes a difference.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And it's important. And it taught me a lot about climate care, as Rick Steves talks about in his books, about what we do around the world impacts what people are breathing every day and how people are able to survive.
Right.
So that was really impactful. I've never forgotten that, and I will never forget that smell.
Mm-hmm.
And then last summer when we went to Boston with our kids on vacation, and we talked about it on the pod, in the middle, unexpectedly, of St. Anthony's feast
Oh, yeah.
in the North End.
St. Anthony's.
The smell of the Italian food in the North End all weekend long, and the bands playing and the families out and the
It
celebrations.
was so fun.
But in all that, I can take the pictures, I can share the videos, I can even tell stories of people I met. I cannot replicate smell.
Right.
And I just think that's another aspect of travel that is so embedded in us. And I think everybody in this room who's staring at me now and watching this could probably tell a story of being in a place unfamiliar. And that's a sensory experience, I think, that's often overlooked when we're trying to read about or watching a documentary about that. And for that, who among us cannot remember walking into grandma's house? You know that smell,
Yeah,
right?
sure. Yeah.
And so I feel like that's just something that is important and impactful for us. So those are our travel stories.
Yes, they are.
We have many, many more. Obviously, I've complained about many of our travel experiences and hiccups along the way. But we wanted to share those with you and also give you an opportunity to hear from our staff after the interview about their experiences. We're very excited to have everyone join us today. We are super excited about our guest, Rick
Yes,
Steve.
definitely. Yep. Rick's got a brand new book out. It's titled On the Hippie Trail, Istanbul to Kathmandu. It is a great conversation. I was really excited about talking to Rick, and he delivered immensely. It's
a phenomenal travel writer and just a phenomenal human being.
Yeah. And the way he connects the travel with his faith, too, is really interesting. So we think you're going to enjoy the interview. So stay tuned for Rick Steves. And then after the interview, you really want to stay tuned for the stories that the GFM staff shares. It is a great rest of the pod. So stay tuned. We've got a lot going on at Good Faith Media in 2025. New logo, new website, new initiatives. And if you don't know, our new magazine. Good Faith Magazine includes Bible study and lessons. Our new lesson writers are Kathy and Nathan Maxwell, and they host a free, short, weekly podcast in support of their Bible study lessons. In the Good Faith Bible Study Podcast, and it's free. Learn more about the magazine, the lessons, the Maxwells, the podcast, and more at goodfaithmedia.org. Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I have got a very special guest with us. Rick Steves is America's most respected authority on European travel. He took his first trip to Europe in 1969, visiting piano factories with his father, a piano importer. At 18, Rick began traveling independently, funding his trips by teaching piano lessons. In 1976, he started his business, Rick Steves Europe, which has grown from a one-man operation to a company with a staff of 100 full-time, well-traveled employees at its headquarters in Washington State. He has produced over 50 guidebooks on European travel, America's most popular travel series on public television, a weekly hour-long national public radio show, a weekly syndicated column, and free travel information available through his travel center at ricksteves.com. Rick has a new book out titled Rick Steves on the Hippie Trail. Rick, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you.
So, Rick, I have to admit, I never thought we'd have royalty on the pod.
Here we are.
Here we are. And I say that because growing up, I can remember on coffee tables throughout my family and friends, there was always the Bible, and then there was Rick Steves Europe. So
Well, I get a lot of people that tell me my book is their Bible, and I think you're in big trouble. But I hope it helps.
I don't know. After reading, I can see the parallels. So let's talk for a minute about the book that you just are coming out with on the Hippie Trail. I have a few questions, quick ones, because this book was written primarily from 23-year-old Rick's perspective in your travel journals. And I have to say, as a mom, I couldn't help but think about your mother and worry on her behalf as you were telling of your adventures. So did she make it through this okay?
You know, when I think back on it, they had every summer I'd go to Europe when I was a kid, and
Right.
I had been doing that on my own since 18, so it's the 4 last summers. And you know, they were nervous, as parents would be, and they always wanted me to send postcards as if I disappeared, they could know where I was. And it'd be a week after the fact, and I thought this is kind of ridiculous, but I said I'll do it as long as you guys pay for the postage. I had no money, so
That's awesome. So, okay, you travel with your friend Gene, and I know we'll get into some of the details, but I just have to ask, poor Gene, is he okay? He was sick
He was
so
sick the
much.
whole time.
Should we check on him?
he's my good buddy. That was a long, long time ago. Him and I did a trip when we graduated from high school in what was that, 73, and that was the great, Europe backpacker, year
Oh
round
yeah.
pass trip. And then when we graduated from college in 78, we did this trip, and we had um we had been dreaming about this for several summers, but we always found reasons to cancel out. It was just too scary. But
Mm.
everything aligned properly when we graduated from college and we're on our way. But yeah, it's a lot of the backpackers were sick along the way. They used to joke there's two kinds of travelers on the Hippie Trail, those who know they have worms and those who don't know they have worms. I read through the journal, I just thought, yeah, Gene was sick a lot, but I was impressed by the resilience and
Yeah,
we
sure.
were undaunted.
You were undaunted. It
We
was
just kept on
amazing.
going. I had a heartier gut, I guess, because I was all right.
All right, so let's go back to probably where we should have started, which is what prompted you to publish this travel journal?
Well, first of all, what prompted me to write it? I'm
Mhm.
just a
Mhm.
23-year-old
Right,
kid.
yeah, sure.
I was a piano teacher back then. I had no interest I didn't know I was going to be a travel writer. I wrote my first travel book 2 years later, Europe Through the Back Door in
Mhm.
1980. But then I was just so happy to be a piano teacher, and every summer kids wouldn't practice. I'm not going to fight that. I'll see you in September. I'm going to Europe. And every year I wrote a journal. And I remember I had a sort of a bad attitude about anybody who wrote a journal with a spiral bound, what do you call
Mhm.
it? A stent.
Stenopad.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'm going to write it in a very quality, hardback, empty book,
Right.
200 pages, blank pages. And I was disciplined. Every summer I did that.
Mm.
And on this trip, I had a sense that this is going to be an epic adventure. And I very, very diligently, every night I wrote in the journal. Every time we were stuck somewhere wasting time, I'd write in the journal. I wrote a 60,000 word journal. And I happened to photograph the whole trip quite well, it turns out. I didn't realize how valuable those pictures would be, but that was kind of unusual back then. And then when I got home from the trip, life happens and the book just got stuck in a box somewhere. And I honestly didn't even think about it for 40 years.
Mhm.
And then during COVID, I found it, read it, and I thought, man, what a story. That was like an
Right?
overblown dig into a 23-year-old version of myself.
Right.
Before I was political, before I was any kind of established writer or
Mm.
anything like that, I was just a kid. I wrote this for me. I didn't write it for anybody else. And I got to say, it was quite good. It was kind of unvarnished and maybe, rough,
Right.
but it was very insightful and it was very honest. And I decided, man, this should be shared. And it wouldn't have been so interesting without the photographs, but the combination of the surviving 60,000 word journal and the photographs made quite a story. And it also happened to be the last year that anybody could do the Hippie Trail. That was the epic trip
Mm.
for backpackers back
Right.
where the Beatles went to see the Maharishi in India and so on. The 60s and the 70s, everybody dreamed about taking that road trip from Istanbul to Kathmandu.
Mhm.
And I did it knowing the Shah was about to fall, knowing the Soviet Union was about to invade, but I didn't know this would be the end of it. And nobody did it after that year. So, I wrote it, I photographed it. It was the last year. I'm an established travel writer with a great relationship with my publisher, so everything made sense. Let's put this thing together. It's the first time I've ever had a hardback book, and
Mhm.
and on the Hippie Trail, Istanbul to Kathmandu, the making of a travel writer is out. It's the unvarnished journal. We edited a little bit for smoothness and flow, and not to spend half the book going to the bathroom and having breakfast. It's just
Right.
the blog
Yep.
stuff we wanted to thin out.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to make me more sensitive or politically correct or anything like that. I just wanted this was me in 1978, not political, quite naive, um, almost reveling in my poverty, uh, knowing when I left Istanbul and headed east, nobody knew who I was
Mhm.
all the way between there and Seattle.
Mm.
So,
And I didn't know anybody all the way from there to Seattle. I was going behind the dark side of the moon with my best friend with not much money, no modern communication like internet that we have today.
Right.
and almost no information in the way of guidebooks. So it was quite a trip.
So
Yeah.
before I turn it over to Mitch, just a couple of other sort of comments, I guess. You mentioned it's a hardback book with photos. It is
Yeah, it
beautifully
is
done.
beautifully done.
I so enjoyed seeing the photos and reading it. It's just a beautiful piece of literature. So that was the first thing. The second thing you mentioned the photos, and I found it so interesting how you had to limit yourself to what
Right.
9 per day, and in this day and age,
We don't remember that. We just click, 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 click.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think, how do you
We have
decide? How do you decide you're 9 a day? So that was really interesting. And you said you held yourself to it and you made it. So I thought that was really impressive.
after the trip would the photographic the coverage of the trip would end prematurely, but we also didn't know if the pictures were turning out until we got home.
Right.
Yeah.
I'd been wrong. I wasn't a professional photographer. They happened to turn out quite well,
Mhm.
and then got all the way home, and they survived for 40 years. So it's I think there's a reason for this. This book was meant to be.
Yeah.
It really was. And the fact that it was kind of one of those weird gifts of COVID. I mean, I think we all kind of have something like that in our lives that you didn't expect that would come from such a bizarre and
Yeah.
horrific time in our lives. So I found that note very interesting that that's when you found this. And so that was, I don't know, just kind of a sweet little nugget I think you gave us.
Yeah.
I
Well,
call
Rick,
it a Corona book.
coronavirus. I love that. Well, Rick, like Missy said, there are so many great moments in this book. I mean, your trip behind the Iron Curtain, meeting Abe in Iran, and the wisdom of this old man that you met in Afghanistan. In fact, the old man gave you this piece of wisdom: a third of the people on the planet eat with spoons and forks like you. A third of the people eat with chopsticks, and a third of the people eat with their fingers like me. And we are all civilized just the same.
And
So,
I remember that to this day, those words they ring, and we
right.
are all civilized just the same. It's a beautiful thing.
Oh my
Beautiful.
gosh, it was so beautiful. So, here's my question. So, what has traveling the world taught you about the global human experience?
Well, it's easy to say we have a heavenly Father and all of us are children of God.
Sure. Oh, yeah, yeah.
But when you travel, if you
Mm.
believe in God, you realize, yes, we are all children of God. That means we're all brothers and sisters. And getting to travel is an opportunity to get to know the family.
Mm.
That's kind of
I love
fundamental.
that.
You want to get to know the family. And I honestly see it like getting to know the family. And then you take that one step further when the whole idea of love your neighbor, you realize, which is a privilege of people who have traveled, that loving your neighbor has nothing to do with proximity.
Hmm.
Across the street, across the sea, they're still the same neighbors. Needs, love, joy.
Right.
Across the sea, across the street, same exact thing. So when I travel, when I vote, when I look at the news, when I consider issues of the day, I consider the family.
I
And
love
I've
that.
been out there, I know the family, and I know it's a beautiful thing. One of my favorite takeaways, Mitch and Missy, is to come home realizing that the world is filled with joy, it's filled with love. It's filled with beautiful people. It's filled with families, parents loving their kids as much as our parents love us. And it's easy to forget that. It's easy to think that our immediate circle of friends and loved ones is more important. But the world is filled with that. Of course, I'm not naive. There's complicated issues.
Sure.
There's bad players and so on. But generally, the world's a beautiful place. And the more we get to know each other, the more we can all celebrate that. And that's one of the reasons I think travel is a real powerful force for peace in a stable world. And that's why I think travel is something that's well worth the investment of time and money, and even the contribution to environmental concerns like climate change. I mean, we can mitigate our travels.
Mhm.
We can mitigate the carbon we create when we travel. But I don't want to be flight shamed out of my travels because I think it's really important, especially in an age now when there's so many powerful forces in media that want us to be afraid.
Mhm.
And it's frightened people who build walls.
Yeah.
And it's people who are enlightened through their travels that realize that the world would be more safe and stable if we build bridges. And the irony is, walls is what makes us unsafe in the long term.
Mhm.
Bridges, it was makes things sustainable and family.
Love that. Amen to that, right?
Yes.
Well, I'm so glad that you mentioned this because one of the things I really appreciate about Rick Steves, speaking of you in third person, is is the fact that you talk about travel not as tourism, but as really an experiential event for a person's life, to really get inside of a community, a people, a culture, and just really experience it full on. And so I hope this is okay, Rick, but as a person of faith, have you ever pondered the parallels of travel between what you do and what Jesus did in the gospel? Because let's face it, Jesus traveled. And in fact, I can remember some sermons that I preached that, he was on the road all the time between villages and cities, and it made him a better rabbi and helped him experience what was going on in the community. That's why he spoke such great truths about loving neighbor and loving God and so many other wonderful teachings. So,
the Bible is filled with people on the road.
right.
The Bible's the story of people on the road. The Way, wasn't that
Yeah,
the name of the first Christians?
that's what they call them, people of the way. Yeah.
Camino. And I remember standing on a hilltop in Palestine. I remember standing on a hilltop in Palestine, looking at a trail leading out before me through the valley.
Hmm.
And it occurred to me, this is such a pristine scene. This could have been walked on by Muhammad in
Hmm.
the 600s. It could have been walked on by Jesus 2,000 years ago. It could have been walked on by Abraham, 4,000 years ago. It's amazing to think that people were in sandals and walking and connecting. And I just love that. And there's so many connections to that. And there's so much wisdom to be found on the road. And there's so much awareness to be found on the road. And that's why when I talk about travel, I like to remind people there's three ways you can be a traveler. You can be a tourist, you can be a traveler, and you can be a pilgrim.
Right.
And you don't need to be all of one or all the others. I'm not trying to get people to be monks on the road.
Mhm.
But you don't need to be all just hedonistic and fun in the sun on the beach. You can have a meaningful experience. So the tourist sees the world as a playground.
Yeah.
A traveler sees the world as school, and a pilgrim sees the world as church or synagogue or mosque. And I like to mix it up. And I've had the fun challenge of being invited to schools and seminaries all over the country. Isn't there a Christian college in Oklahoma City?
Yeah. OCU, Oklahoma Christian College.
Yeah, it was a great experience for me to go there
Hmm.
and to share what I call travel as a spiritual act.
Hmm.
I give talks all over called travel as a political act. But if I'm talking at a church, you can swap out the political and
Sure.
swap in spiritual. It's the same thing. As a matter of fact, I should remind people, if you'd like, I could talk all day about it, just because I really feel like, for me, the road is church. My favorite, you know, cathedral in Europe is walking on a ridge high in the Alps. It's enough to make a Lutheran raise their hands to the sky. But I've got a talk called Travel as a Spiritual Act that I've got on my website if anybody would like to
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
watch it. Listeners free, and they can just look in the lectures section at ricksteves.com.
So what I hear you saying is Rick's next T-shirt will be Rick Steves and basically Jesus. That's
Yeah.
what I hear.
Rick and Jesus on the road together. Yeah. I love
So
that.
people always say, what would Rick do when they're traveling in Europe?
Yeah.
And
Basically, what would Jesus do? Go and talk to people.
well, that's what carbonates the travel experience, is to
Right.
recognize that, you just got to meet people. That's the mark of a good traveler. Not how's your bucket list doing.
Right.
How many people have you met? And how have you seen travel as a way to learn more about your home by leaving it and looking at it from a distance?
Exactly.
Oh, I love that.
I love that idea.
Yeah, dude.
If somebody's never been out of America, and I've spent a third of my life out of America looking at it from a distance,
Hmm.
you can say I have an angle on America that is true,
Mhm.
that person does not have the advantage of. And if your worldview is shaped by commercial news media, that's pretty different than my worldview, which is shaped by getting out there and talking to people.
Mm.
So, as you mentioned a moment ago, to kind of pivot from the people to the creation, you talk about travel as being able to see creation. So, how have your experiences impacted your views and how you approach creation care?
Um, when I travel, for one thing, I become tuned into the fragility of nature and the blessing of nature and the whole stewardship dimension of nature. Um, I just love the thought that this whole world that we get to call home is a gift, and that if you don't get out there and walk through the forest, walk through the garden, smell the flowers, you can't fully appreciate it. And experiential travel is kind of a buzzword lately.
Mhm.
And it is not just seeing tired cultural cliches on stage. It is experiencing the world. It's trying new things. Again, it's getting out of your comfort zone, uh, seeing culture shock as a constructive thing,
Mm.
the growing pains of a broadening perspective. And it needs to be curated. That's what I do as a travel teacher and a tour guide and a TV host. I curate that culture shock, but I'm sure not going to counsel people on ways to avoid it.
Right.
I think America needs a little culture shock. It'll humble us. You know, we're a lovely part of this world. We're 4% of this world, but I think the only thing exception about us in God's eyes is our ability to think that we are exceptional.
Mm. Love that.
So, just kind of as I've been reading on your website and preparing for today and learning about all the incredible work that you do outside of just the travel writing and tourism or tourist industry, but you're active in making sure that your traveling is climate conscious, as you mentioned a moment ago, that you still want to be able to take an airplane over to go somewhere, but I know you've got some very intentional ways in which you do address some climate issues and climate change. I just would love our listeners to hear about some of that intentionality that you have.
Yeah, because if you do care about stewardship of the planet, and if you do believe there is climate change, well, we're contributing to it when we travel.
Hmm.
I don't want to be flight shamed out of it, but I do want to be mindful of that. And what I think my goal, and as a teacher, what I recommend, if you're going to travel, travel in a way that broadens your perspective. Travel on purpose. And if you are going to travel, travel in a way that minimizes your carbon footprint. You can make choices. It's much better to take the train than to fly from point to point in Europe for shorter jumps and this kind of thing. And then if you do travel, be honest about the carbon you're putting into the environment and mitigate it. Science understands that you can spend money and create as much good as you create bad,
Mm.
which zeroes out your carbon. It's nothing to brag about. It's nothing heroic. It's just baseline ethical for me when I go to Europe and back to realize that I create enough carbon by flying from here to Europe and back um, that would need $30 smartly invested to mitigate it. And then you can do that in the conventional first world way of buying carbon offsets. I do it a little more entrepreneurially and a little more, I think, love your neighborly. I like to invest in farmers in the developing world, enabling them to employ climate smart agriculture technology so they can actually produce more while contributing less carbon to the environment. Half of the world is smallholder farmers, half of the humanity, 4 billion people, little mom and pop farms, and they're working desperately just to feed their kids. And they don't have the luxury to think about how much carbon am I emitting with my practices, but they emit a lot. But with some little bit of help from science, they can take these new technologies and actually contribute less to climate change while producing more crops. And this is to me very exciting. And what I do as a tour promoter, I take 30,000 people on Rick Steves tour buses every year. That's a lot of carbon. I make a lot of money and I should be paying for my carbon.
Mhm.
So it takes $30 per customer to zero out their carbon. 30,000 times 30 is $900,000, rounded up to a million. Every year, I invest $1 million in a portfolio of 10 nonprofit organizations in the developing world, helping farmers do their work while contributing less to climate change. I'm so excited about that. I talk about it because I hope other tour companies can do that or individuals can do this kind of an investment to zero out their carbon. And it's just ethical. It's baseline ethical if we want our children and grandchildren to be able to travel and enjoy the same world that we're so fortunate to be able to see.
That's incredible.
If anybody wants to see that, it's a complicated sort of treatise almost that I've written and devised. It's on my website, and right on the top it says, if you're a tour organizer, steal this program and don't credit me. Just start paying for your carbon. It's
Yeah.
that simple. We have a system of government here where that wouldn't be good for business, and
Right.
why should we pay for our carbon? But that's a cost of goods sold. For
Hmm.
me to take these people to Europe is I incur a cost, and I'm very committed to having travel broaden our perspective. So when you go home with a cool souvenir, which is what I consider a dual citizenship.
Yeah.
You're more thankful than ever that you're an American, but you also have a global citizenship. And now when you get into the voting booth, you don't think what's just good for me and my family. You think what's good for humanity, what's good for the entire all the children of God. I mean, that's so exciting to be able to
Mhm.
see it that way. And that's the beautiful benefit of having that opportunity to see the power and the beauty of love between parents and a little child overseas and compared to the love that we have for our little children.
I
Mm.
love that. I think I read somewhere on your website or maybe an article that you had contributed to about people, you felt like people needed to travel before they got their voter registration. And
Yeah.
I just thought that's such a great way to think
That's a
about.
dream of mine, Missy. If everybody had to travel before they could vote, we'd have a different political landscape right now, I can tell you that.
I think we might.
But I would say it kind of goes to something a little more fundamental, fear,
Mhm.
Mhm.
fear in our society. And to me, people used to say bon voyage. Now they say have a safe trip. And when somebody tells me have a safe trip, I'm inclined to say, well, you have a safe stay at home. Because where I'm going statistically, and I know statistics are optional these days, but where I'm going statistically safer than where you're staying.
Right.
I if you love your kids and you know the statistics, you'll take them to Europe tomorrow. It's safer over there.
Mhm.
I say that facetiously, but I also sell tours with that little line. But fear is for people who don't get out. The flip side of fear is understanding. We gain understanding when we travel. Think of who would be the most frightened people in our society. I would think it's people buried, metaphorically anyways, deep in the middle of our country
Mhm.
with no passports,
Mhm.
whose worldview is shaped not by personal experience, but by fear mongering, commercial TV news.
Mhm.
That's what shapes a worldview of somebody who's never traveled, and that makes a person easy to manipulate because they're afraid of what's out there.
Yeah.
And if you get out there, not only do you realize it's not a scary place, but you make it a safer place because when you travel there, it makes it tougher for their propaganda to dehumanize us.
Mhm.
And when you come home, it makes it tougher for our propaganda to dehumanize them. We all become closer
Mhm.
and we all become uh, sharing a more stable planet. And stability is going forward is going to be a beautiful thing. And I want to be proud of my country. I don't want to live in a bully nation.
Right.
I want to live in a loving nation. And if it calls itself a Christian nation, I would like it to take love thy neighbor seriously because there's nothing more fundamental I can't think of in my faith than
Yeah.
that beautiful idea of love your neighbor.
I'm so glad you brought up the subject of fear and this idea of America being a Christian nation, because one of the initiatives here at Good Faith Media has been countering Christian nationalism and trying to convince people there is a more healthy and constructive way to live out your faith as a Christian, in particular, as a person of faith as a whole. And so, one of the questions, or just one of the observations that I have made in reading your book, watching your videos, has been your encounter not only with other cultures, but with other religions. And so,
Mhm.
in this place that we exist right now, with isolationism on the rise, with Christian nationalism on the rise, with this otherism that we're encountering on the rise, what you have done has opened a door to other worlds and other peoples. And how has your introduction to other religions across the world shaped your own theology and your own faith? Because the critic would say that will cause you to doubt or that will cause you to question your own faith. But my experience, Rick, has been it's strengthened my faith when I get to have these conversations and experiences with Muslims and Sikhs and Jews all around the world. So I'm going to let you take it from there.
I love that idea, Mitch, and it's so important when we travel. I'm not in business as a Christian to condemn other people.
No, yeah.
I'm in business to love God and love my neighbor. And when you travel, um, I love this idea that Muhammad said 1600 years ago. Muhammad said, don't tell me how educated you are, tell me how much you've traveled.
Hmm.
And one of the rationales for having people travel all the way to Mecca for their pilgrimage back in the Middle Ages and so on was just for people to have a reason to get out of their community and see the rest of the world. And it just makes it so productive. And when we travel, I make a habit of not being ethnocentric in my faith. The result is I become a stronger, more committed Christian from
Right.
my travels. But I step into another place of worship and I do my best to respect it and understand it rather than judge it and compare it.
Hmm.
It's not my place to judge it, really.
Hmm.
And that can even be within our Christian faith. I mean, I'm a Lutheran, I'm pretty Protestant. For years, I would go to St. Peter's Basilica sacred, most holy spot for a billion Roman Catholics. And I would be bummed out. I would be kind of pissed off. I mean, what's with all these saints and the
Right.
cathedral that's gilding? And is this really Christ-like?
Mm-hmm.
And I was not having a good time. And then I realized, hey, Rick, park your Protestant sword at the side. Go in as a temporary Roman Catholic.
Right.
And I did. And I've been doing that for 20 years, and it's an altogether different experience. It's fundamentally more constructive and beautiful. And now I look forward to my temporary Roman Catholic loyalty when I go into the greatest church in Christendom.
Right.
And then I look at it and I go, I don't judge it. I don't want to be chronocentric. I don't want to
Right.
judge it by today's sensibilities. I want to see 500 years ago when this church was built. That was the best Christians could do to glorify God.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it on those terms. And then I go, wow, this is incredible, you see.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you travel, you encounter a lot of autocratic societies,
Sure.
a lot of dictators, a lot of wannabe autocrats, whether they're far right or far left, that are capitalizing on people's faith to further their political agenda.
We don't have to travel that far, Rick, to encounter that now.
I'm trying to be artful. But, we have Christian nationalism.
We do.
There's Jewish nationalism. There's Hindu nationalism. There's Muslim nationalism. There's a lot of people capitalizing on that. I mean, Hitler was a Christian nationalist. People can differ, but I do not like the American flag in front of the church when I'm worshiping.
We don't either.
It distracts me.
Right.
Because I want to love my neighbor. And again, there's no proximity to neighbor. I love my country, but it doesn't really belong. I believe in the separation of church and state. And I also believe in the separation of mosque and state.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in Iran, a theocracy, and I've been in Turkey, which is a pluralistic society looking westward. And I felt a stronger faith in the pluralistic modern society than I felt in the enforced theocracy.
Mm-hmm.
I felt a much stronger Muslim spirit during Ramadan in Turkey than I did in Iran, where people had to go to mosque.
Right.
And in Turkey, people have the opportunity to go to mosque. And I just love that. And, I don't need my government to enforce my faith.
Yep.
My faith is organic, in spite of what my government wants me to do. And the more we learn about Christian nationalism, the more we see that this has an agenda. It's not true to our Christian faith, as far as I'm concerned.
Definitely.
You
told me I could ask this question, and your name is on the question.
I know. Go ahead. I knew you were going to take it back.
Okay, Rick, I've got a very important question to ask you. I mean, as a good Lutheran, as a student of Europe, and you've done specials on Germany before, I've got to ask this question. Have you made your way to the door of the Wittenberg Chapel?
Of course I have. Of course.
So for context.
Yeah. October the 5th, 1517.
October 31st.
31st. October 31st, yeah.
Martin Luther nailed his 95 Thesis to the door of the Wittenberg Chapel.
My children can cite that.
There you go.
Before they knew their phone number, they would recite that.
Well, I grew up looking at those little black and white melodramatic teaching videos in Sunday school,
right?
With somebody, whacking the hammer with 95 pieces on that door. And I always wanted to produce a TV show about the Reformation. I produced a half-hour show for the ELCA.
Yeah.
That was I produced that on the condition that church headquarters would send it to all 10,000 ELCA congregations.
Mm-hmm.
And that was back in the day of DVDs. And they did. And that was fun. But I wanted to do it with a higher production standard. I wanted to do it with a broader audience. And I wanted to do it in a whole hour.
Mm-hmm.
And so we produced to celebrate the 500th anniversary of 1517. Mm-hmm. I can always remember that date because it's 2017.
Right.
We produced a 1-hour special on the Reformation, which aired all over the country on public television. And that was one of the most rewarding and exciting TV programs I've ever written and hosted. And if anybody wants to see that, every TV show I've ever produced, Hunger in Hope, Lessons Learned in Ethiopia and Guatemala, The Holy Land, Israelis and Palestinians Today, Iran, Yesterday and Today, Fascism, Lessons We Can Learn from 20th Century Europe, and the Reformation and Martin Luther.
Mhm.
All of those 1 hour specials, plus everything else I've ever done, is you can watch it for free at my website,
Mhm.
or if you're a member of public television with the PBS app.
Yeah.
But it was so fun to write that
Oh, I can imagine.
script in a way that Lutherans could use
Mm.
in Sunday school for new
Mhm.
members, in a way that Catholics could respect, and in a way that non-Christians would actually find interesting and curious to see, why is Martin Luther considered one of the top 2 or 3 most influential people of the last 1,000 years in European history? Well, for good reason. He translated the Word of God into a language people could read.
Mhm.
That's called freedom from a faith point of view,
Mhm.
because up until then, of course, elites who could speak Latin were the only people who could read the scriptures, and then they could interpret it and spoon feed their flock the way
Right.
they wanted to, so it didn't cause a big problem. Luther, that's why so many people were burned at the stake. Why? For trying to translate the Bible into a language their people could read.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yay, Luther.
Exactly right.
And hooray for Gutenberg, because without
I
Gutenberg,
know,
Luther
right?
couldn't spread his ideas. And
Yeah.
it's no coincidence they were both in the same generation.
Mhm.
So Luther wrote in a wonderful colloquial way. His best buddy Cranach was a wonderful political cartoonist. And with Gutenberg's printing press, you didn't have to have monks transcribing it by hand. You could print it up. Consequently, Luther's little staple-bound pamphlets were the first bits of information ever to go viral. They were affordable, they were illustrated, they were fun to read in the people's language, and people were really curious about what's going on with the church,
Yeah.
and purgatory and all that kind of stuff. And Luther was the most widely read author of the 16th century in Germany.
Yeah. Well, I have not personally been to the Wittenberg Chapel, but that is a place I would love to experience. Well, Rick Steve, it has been a joy, my friend. Rick's new book is Rick Steves on the Hippie Trail, Istanbul to Kathmandu, and the making of a travel writer. It has been a joy visiting with you. But Rick, before we let you go, we got one last question that we ask all of our guests, and Missy has the honor of asking it.
So, Rick, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
There's more to tell. Well, this world is a complicated place, and it's more important than ever that we understand it and each other. And if we just phone it in and rely on other people to help us better understand the world, we're not doing what we owe to our society
Mm.
and to the people who follow us. If you have any opportunity to get out there, get to know your neighbors, get to know your enemies, get out of your comfort zone, and come home and help this country fit better into the family of nations, I think it's more important now than ever. And if you can mix a little bit of pilgrim into your travels, you can come home with that most wonderful souvenir, that broader perspective. You can share it with your loved ones. I think that's making travel a spiritual act, and that's a beautiful thing.
Love that. What a great way to end this pod. Well, Rick, I'm going to let you go, but I'm going to let you sign off this segment of our podcast and episode. So if you would please sign off with your catchphrase that you end every show with.
On behalf of all of us at Good Faith Weekly, I want to wish you happy travels and keep on traveling.
So, as we mentioned in the opening, we are very fortunate this week to actually be in the same space with our beloved staff members. And in an effort to involve them in the fun that we have recording this podcast and also to lighten our load a little bit this week, we've asked each of our staff members to share with us an impactful travel memory that they have, as we discuss with Rick and as he talks about in his book, the importance of travel in getting to see the world outside your bubble. And sometimes that can be exciting, sometimes it's terrifying. And so we thought it'd be a fun way to kind of examine some of those experiences with our staff. And first up today, we have our creative coordinator slash genius extraordinaire, Callie Chisholm. So, Callie, give us a travel story that was impactful in your life.
Sure. So, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, President George Bush encouraged us to consume rather than to console. He told us the best way to return to normal after a traumatic national event was to go shopping. It was one of his many infamous faux pas. At the time, I was 4 years old. 14 years later, my first plane ride took me and my fellow classmates to New York City for a Columbia Scholastic Journalism Conference. It was my first time being in a city so culturally diverse and large. Getting on the subway with my Metro card, visiting the iconic Seinfeld Cafe, and eating authentic Cuban cuisine was an exciting experience for me. On one of our free days, we were given a very stark choice of afternoon activity: visit the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, or go shopping on Saks Fifth Avenue. The majority of the group voted to go shopping. I wanted to go to the museum, and I was severely outvoted. A classmate standing behind me muttered something along the lines of, "We don't want to do sad shit."
Mm. Wow. As you were sharing that story, you just couldn't help but think of what Rick talks about in his book, in speeches and in the interviews, travel being as a tourist, or on the flip side, being as a pilgrimage. And to me, you just kind of personified the difference in those experiences.
Yeah.
And kudos to you at that young age to say, I want to go see the museum. And I'm sorry you missed out on that experience. What I hear you saying is GFM needs some sort of
Yes.
pilgrimage trip for you to go and get a makeup experience. This is what I hear.
Maybe one day.
And since Mitch doesn't have a microphone right now, we're just going to consider it so.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Thank you, Callie, for sharing. Next up, we have Stephanie, our data and sales manager. If you're wondering what that means, so are we. No, I'm teasing. Basically, anything that happens behind the scenes, she is in control of it. So we make sure that we take care of her always. So Stephanie, welcome to Good Faith Weekly, your first appearance.
I'm so excited.
So tell us about an impactful travel experience you had.
Well, I'm not a huge traveler, but the one story that stood out in my mind was November 2001. My husband and I had this great trip planned in San Francisco. We were very excited. And of course, the events of 9/11 happened and we weren't sure if we were going or if we weren't going. Well, we went. We decided to go. As we landed and got off the plane in San Francisco, and you mentioned earlier the bubble, and we
Mhm.
very much lived in a bubble. We walk off the airplane, go to baggage claim, and we are surrounded by National Guardsmen carrying their service rifles everywhere. And it was the first moment where I realized, oh, wow, like, this is not my bubble anymore. And even during that trip, because of the Golden Gate Bridge, was a very heavy military presence there. And even though it was a fun trip, it reminded us that, yes, we live in a bubble, but there's other things going on in this world that impact everybody, no matter where it happens. It's affecting everybody. And that just always stood out in my mind. And it's a short story, but it's a very impactful story that I still remember like it was yesterday.
Well, it's a moment we all realize that nothing will ever be quite the same.
Exactly. And we were even kind of scared that time to cross the Golden Gate because there was rumors of things happening to the bridge. So it was scary, but I'm glad we did it.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And now we are welcoming Craig Nash, our senior editor, to the pod. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you.
So tell us your travel story.
Yeah. So 3-4 years ago, a couple of friends and I traveled to Marfa, Texas, which is a desert town in West Texas. We flew from Dallas. It was a 2-hour flight from Dallas, and we had to drive 3.5 hours back the other direction to get there. It's in the middle of the desert. Marfa has become famous in recent years as a destination for artists from New York and Paris, but it's also a town that was settled for many years by Mexican immigrants, and so it's really a town that kind of highlights this tension of gentrification. Marfa is also where the movie Giant was filmed in the 1950s, so it has this kind of lore around it, but it's also this very small town. And when we were there, we visited an art show that was in a little storefront just off of downtown, and all these Paris, New York artists, kind of highfalutin folks were there, bringing attention to the town. But then we walked out of it and we walked a few blocks down to the courthouse square, where there was the Marfa Christmas tree lighting ceremony, which Marfa is kind of a well-known place, and you would expect this to be a big thing, but it wasn't. It was the people in the community on probably a very small budget had this ceremony, and their Christmas tree was just a 6-foot plastic tree that was lit like, a tree that would be in your house, and it was set off on the sidewalk by the courthouse. And it was just a very almost Charlie Brown Christmas type moment. But it just highlighted this tension. And I know Rick Steves has spoken and written a lot about this, about how these like really unique communities are dying, and you want to travel to them and help revive them, to draw attention to them, but also the act of traveling to it also kind of corrupts the place a little bit. And so we just, in the midst of that trip, we're living in that tension of recognizing the damage that's done to this town, and also recognize that we're helping to do the damage.
That's such a hard tension to deal with when we're traveling. And I know Rick talks about some of this, both in the book, the interview, and other things we've seen him on, is how to live intentionally within that tension, recognizing it, honoring it. Yeah. And also understanding your contribution.
Sure. But also many of the keys are finding the local places that are at risk of dying and shopping there rather than the New York art show,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this is funny. I grew up in Texas. You know this. I've never heard of Marfa until just now.
Oh, you've heard of the Marfa lights. So that's the other thing they're famous for.
I have not.
Oh, well, you got to look up the Marfa lights.
I will have to go Google that.
It could be a spaceship. It could just be a trick of the eye.
Maybe now I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing, Craig.
Thank you.
Now joining us is Starlette Thomas, the director of our Raceless Gospel Initiative at Good Faith Media. Starlette, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so tell us about a travel experience that impacted you.
Sure. I was in Stavanger, Norway, for the Baptist World Alliance meeting in 2023. I was wandering through a neighborhood near the conference center, and the streets were empty. No police patrols, no litter on the streets, no traffic congestion or honking of horns. It was the silence that struck me. It was so quiet that I could hear my quick steps on the sidewalk, and the quiet but cheerful beckoning of two small children who wanted me to buy their sweet treats. They were all smiles, marked by a few missing teeth. We did a quick exchange of money for a baked good and a cold drink. Then, to my surprise, they waited. They waited for me to offer feedback. Was it good for me? I tasted and could immediately see that this was a reminder that there are other ways of being and belonging in community. And that these little babies, these children, had prepared a table just for me.
What a powerful reminder of community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome, Rod. Rod Phillips is our associate media producer, the newest member of our team. Rod, welcome.
Hello, hello, hello.
So tell us about a travel experience that has impacted you.
A travel experience that has impacted me was in 2016. I'm from a small town called Shaw, Mississippi, which is about a square mile.
Wow.
And so I got the chance to travel for the first time to New York. And since that was my first time, it was kind of rough and scary to get on the plane. When I got on that plane, I landed in New York. It was a big experience for me.
A little bit different than Shaw, Mississippi?
Just a little bit, just a little bit. But it was just so many people there.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from a town of about 1,100 people, you do not see that many people. I mean, it was just lots and lots of people.
You probably saw that many people just in the airport, huh?
Yeah. It was so many people, and it kind of shaped my perspective on life.
Mm-hmm.
That you get the chance to, when you get the chance to travel, you take it.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to learn so many things outside of the things you feel like that bother you the most of being in a small town. You get to understand that there's more out there to life than just where you are. I feel like that kind of shaped my perspective on life, just being able to go somewhere from where you feel like people don't know you, don't understand where you're from, or feel like you've been forgotten in a small town, to somewhere where everything is known.
Mm-hmm.
It's It's a big difference.
And if I remember correctly, you've spoken of this experience before, setting the tone for goals in your life, which helped lead you to work with us at Good Faith Media
Yes.
because you wanted to travel and be a photographer and videographer.
Yes, that was my goal in life, was to be a traveling photographer.
And here you are.
Yes, and I'm living in that dream.
We're so glad you're here.
I'm glad to be here.
Thank you for sharing. And now we have our longest tenured staff person joining us, Cliff Vaughn.
Hello, Missy.
Cliff is our media producer extraordinaire who's been doing this job for 25 years.
5 years. How blessed am I?
You started at 5, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. Tell us about a travel experience that impacted you.
I love traveling, and some of that inspiration has come from Rick Steves. My wife and I, we love Rick Steves. But in 2018, a rare thing happened. Everyone in my family had a spring break that was the same week. It almost never happens. But my wife and I took our kids, and they were, I think, 12 and 15 at the time, and we all went to Costa Rica, and we had a wonderful time. But I remember one experience in particular. We had spent the day at this park where I think we were the only people there. It was in the mountains of the Guanacaste region of Costa Rica. And we rode horses, we zip-lined, we sat in these natural hot springs, and it was lovely. But at the end of the day, we were driving back down the mountain. We were all getting hungry, and we came across this little village called Cañas Dulces. And we just said, okay, we're going to stop and just see what's going on. So we did stop, and it was Good Friday, and there was a little village church, and people, about the time we stopped, it was... I remember it was starting to get a little dark, but people just started emerging from their houses and heading to the little village church where they were going to have a Good Friday service. And I remember just feeling drawn to the church and wanting to draw near to these people. And I was a stranger, but I just remember feeling grateful to kind of witness this and be a part of it in my own way, even though I was an onlooker. Then there was a pizza shop there, and we went in and ordered a pizza, and there was a guy outside. I remember he was just wearing like shorts and a t-shirt, no shoes and socks. His name was Chebe, I remember. And we talked to him in Spanish, and our kids were in a Spanish immersion school. So we had a chance to talk with him and just talk to him about life in the town. And it was one of those things that would have been so easy just to keep driving down the mountain and say, oh, well, we'll go to McDonald's on the way home.
Right.
But we didn't choose that. We chose to stop in Cañas Dulces, and we were rewarded for that choice of breaking out of our comfort zone.
I think that so perfectly exemplifies what Rick is trying to teach us through his travels and through his ministries and through his good work that he does.
Yeah, take a little
take
breath.
those moments.
Yeah,
take the side streets, go to the village, talk to people.
Talk to people.
That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch and Missy.
So, Mitch.
Oh my gosh, what great stories.
Was such a fun exercise.
Yeah.
And I have to say, thank you for indulging me. This was an idea I had in the place that all the best ideas come from, which is the shower.
Yeah.
After we interviewed Rick Steves and we knew we were traveling for staff retreat, and I just realized, oh no, we've got work and then we've got to figure out a way to record, and how are we going to do this? And this idea came to me, and I was so excited to bring our staff in and to let them be part of this conversation. It was just very serendipitous that this topic this week so perfectly played into hearing about a human experience. So I appreciate you letting me do this.
Yeah, what incredible stories. Just a reminder. I mean, we knew this already, but what a great staff that we get to work with each and every week at Good Faith Media. But wow, what a well-traveled group we live and work with, and they find meaning.
And I love that it's a group that's so intentional in everything that they do. When I presented this idea, I know one of the things I kind of mentioned was I didn't want a bunch of mission trip stories. I mean, not that there's not, a place and a space for doing that, but I really wanted a human and organic. And it was funny. I didn't even have to say that. Yeah. Our staff is so intentional in the way that they approach the world, the way that they approach their fellow human beings. And I'm getting chills. I love it. I'm so thankful.
Well, I'm glad you had the idea. Great job. Well done. I was a little hurt that I wasn't invited to be part of the storytellings, but it looks like you all had a great time.
Listeners get enough of our travel stories.
Very true. Very true. But I'm glad you got a chance to sit down with the staff and hear their stories. Absolutely remarkable. So thanks for doing that. Appreciate that. Well, Missy and I will be back next week. Until then, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.